We're in a pandemic, which is a public health crisis, and the economy is ruined, an economic crisis, and creeping up every day we get closer to the next one. The housing crisis. Evictions and foreclosures are going to be happening. As we talked about yesterday, on Friday, the federal moratorium on evictions and properties with federally backed mortgages and for tenants who receive government-assisted housing expired, and most of the statewide eviction moratoriums are winding down. Great job, government, in coordinating between the federal government and the states in that way so that we're all screwed simultaneously. Proceedings for eviction have resumed in more than 30 states. Moratoriums end in Hawaii and Illinois this week, and in August, evictions will pick up in New York and Nevada. So just New York. Not like a big issue or anything. Now, there is a chance that we could see a resumption of these moratoriums. Larry Kudlow said yesterday that the relief package will include new stimulus checks and an extension of eviction moratoriums. Bear in mind, though, he's not in charge. Senate Republicans are in charge, so God only knows what we'll get. But if it does stay that no new moratorium and evictions can proceed, it is going to be brutal, and it's not going to be brutal in an equal fashion. It's going to be hitting some communities, some states, some demographics far harder. We're going to have numbers in just a minute, but Ida, I wanted to get your take on this. How worried are you about this next emergency?
So worried that I started crying while you were, and I'm not a softie, I don't cry like that, but just listening to the fact that William Barr said that racism is not a thing in America.
Yeah.
Coupled with what's happening to people of color, specifically people that come from where I come from, I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, you've never seen me cry on this show before. That's how, I have to say, what's it going to take, America, for you to know that this is real and this war is against all of us, even though it affects us, people of color, more. It's against all of us who don't have that pot of gold in the top 1%. And what is happening from them decreasing the unemployment to the housing to the increase of law enforcement to us being locked away and not communicating with each other and not having connection with each other. Mm-hmm. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is the reality that we're living now. And some of you are so selfish and such hateful people that you would bargain our freedom away just because you hate Black people and immigrants, and you hate women, and you hate gay people, and you hate trans people. That is how much the work has been done. They have been dumbing us down forever. And we keep saying this over and over again, trying to wake people up. And I am in the constant state of rage because you are upset about having to wear a mask that not only protects others, but protects you. But the fact that these mortgages, what makes me the saddest, because I'm not a selfish person, is that the people who are going to be affected the most are people of color, people that are poor, white people that are poor. And I wish that I was an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos, where I can make a difference in those people's lives. But people who have hearts like us don't become people like that.
Yeah.
And it's what hurts the most, I think.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like all of the other crises we're experiencing, the one that's coming up with evictions is not, it is going to hit Black and brown people far harder. And we're going to have those numbers in just 1 second. As we go through this, though, bear in mind that the eviction moratorium going away isn't the only, it's not just one punch to these people. It's a simultaneous one, because for many of them, they're going to be losing their federal unemployment checks, the enhanced unemployment that they've been receiving during the pandemic. Now, some kind of enhanced unemployment is likely to continue, but the Republicans, their first offer was cutting it from $600 a week to $100 a week, which is like $100 insult, effectively. And the Democrats, at least one that I saw today, said, well, we're not going to draw a line in the sand and say it has to be 600. So the surrender has begun. So God only knows where that's going to end. Now, how does that interact with the eviction moratorium? If people can't pay their rent, they're probably going to be kicked out. And if these realtors, if these companies are allowed to kick them out, they will. By one estimate, some 40 million Americans could be evicted during the upcoming crisis. For comparison, there were 2.3 million evictions in 2016. One leader cited here said we could see that just in the next month. And it is going to hit different parts of the country very differently. If you look at this is going to break down every state. I understand that the graphic is small, but bear with me. You can see that some states like West Virginia, up to 60% of renter households already can't afford their rent and face risk of eviction. You can see the South is being very hard hit. 50% of renters in Louisiana, 55% in Mississippi. These are crazy numbers that are going to affect tens of millions of people. And as we've alluded to, there's a racial component to this, a strong one. While about 74% of white households live in homes they own, only about 44% of black households and 49% of Latino households do. So they are going to be a larger percentage of this. And already, black and Latino households also pay a higher share of their income on rent in most major metropolitan areas, according to a Zillow analysis, which does not combine well with millions of people being laid off and not being given the money necessary to survive. And bear in mind that this is what we're talking about for the pandemic. But before the pandemic, it was already unequal, with a University of Washington study coming out before the American pandemic started, saying that evictions around the state shows that more women are evicted than men, and in the state's two most populous counties, eviction rates among black and Latinx adults are almost 7 times higher than for white adults. And when a pandemic is hitting these communities harder already, when the economic damage is going to hit them harder, and the system was already set up to evict them at far higher rates, we can only imagine what August and September and October are going to end up looking like.
Well, I'll tell you right now, two things. The crime rate is going to go up because people are going to be hungry. They're going to be struggling. They're going to be trying to take care of themselves and their families. You'll hear a bunch of racist white people talking about this black on black crime that doesn't exist. It's just a crime. But you're going to see the crime rate go up in these communities because people will be starving. These tent cities are going to be growing. You rich people and you wealthy people who don't like the landscape that homeless people create in your neighborhoods are going to be complaining because the homeless rate is going to go up. And then you will understand that you cannot dispose of human beings. Yeah. They are part of the ecosystem. And I'll tell you, John, I've been evicted. I had a sheriff come remove me from my home with my children. And it wasn't because I was lazy. And it wasn't because I didn't care about my children or I was a bad mother. It was because I couldn't afford to live a decent life with the amount of money that I was getting paid for doing the same job that my male counterparts were doing and not getting paid the same amount of money. Yeah. And not being able to survive. And I got an eviction, a repossession. So when I speak of this, I'm not speaking from this stands from like, oh, those people. I am one of those people. I lived in a Best Western. I lived in an Expedition truck before it got repossessed with my 2 children. Wow. So it's not that hard to become one of those people that we don't like to make eye contact with because we think that there's some sector of the world that doesn't lack the go-getter to go get, to go work. Yeah. Human beings, and a lot of them are just their situation is a direct result of the toxic capitalism in this country.
Yeah, and in some ways, I talked about this yesterday in the show, also combined with the lack of interest in actually dealing with the pandemic from the federal government. So we had to lock down. Okay, we all agree on that. That costs some jobs. Hypothetically, if the lockdown had continued for a couple of months, we could have really killed this pandemic and opened safely. But we didn't do that. We started reopening prematurely, forcing generally working class Americans to go into unsafe environments. That cost lives. But also, it meant that the pandemic started up again, and we've had to again constrain our economy. So now more people are losing their jobs once again. That's not their fault. Like, the baristas who have to go back to work, the people working at supermarkets and in meat processing plants, they didn't say, hey, buddy, let's get this economy revving up again. They were forced to go back. And now it is going to grind to a halt because of the terrible public health strategy from both governors and also the president. And so their health is on the line during every step of this. They're going to lose their jobs again. And many of them, since they're not going to get as much assistance, possibly any assistance, a lot of them are going to lose their homes too. They're going to be kicked out of the places that they rent. And when we say 40 million people, that's between 1 in 10 and like 1 in 5 of all people in America. We already have a massive unaddressed homelessness problem in this country, and we're going to kick more than 10% of the entire US population out of where they're renting? That's insanity. That's insanity. And it's barely even being talked about, aside from a couple of good politicians like Ilhan Omar and AOC and, the obvious people that you'd expect.
That's because there's an obvious agenda against the poor and, the marginalized in this community. And until people wake up and realize that these are not lofty conspiracies from behold the pale horse, this is happening in our country for real. And these are, the reason why people discredit those types of ideologies is because they're coming from the top. Yeah. But if the other thing is, like, you think about the essential workers. People started honoring them and thanking them on social media. You see these big companies thanking them. They're the ones being hit the hardest by, COVID. Yeah. You talk about the Latino population in America. In addition to having to deal with the stigma that comes with, the anti-immigration sentiment in this country, then you think about the reality that so many Latinos are out there doing the essential jobs that a lot of people scoff at and then criticize them for having and saying they come here to take the jobs. Now they're being impacted by this pandemic, and then there's no healthcare system in place that is adequate enough to help those people that are not making the money that these super rich people are making. And you think about the Black community, and it is the same thing. And so when we talk about this, this movement about essential workers, but we didn't even start giving a damn about these people. And I come from these people, so I don't ever look down at the people who collect our trash or ring up my groceries or deliver food or, nurses. These people have been around, and now you see people talking about them. But think about yourselves. I mean, this is a time of reckoning for us all. I have to reflect daily. How have you been with the treatment of these people prior to this pandemic? Yeah. Because the way that we treat them is a reflection of what this country thinks about them. And we have some serious atoning to do in this country, but throughout the world. We just we really need we need a do-over, a makeover.
We do. We need a period where we shut down the country, not for the pandemic, after the pandemic. We just shut down and reflect on what's actually going on. But unfortunately, we know that, when there are attempts to do that, like the 1619 Project, 20% of the country loses their mind.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.